Hey there, welcome back to the channel. Wow, what a crazy day of trading. Today was the day after President Trump announced a 90-day reprieve, I guess, on the tariff war. And there was a giant bounce yesterday. And today, the market, recognizing that yesterday's news wasn't really good news, there was a lot of profit taking today. But in that profit taking, there were a ton of bounces. And today, here you are, I have 24 trades in the book, and they ranged because the bounces are very wild. Sometimes they were $100, sometimes they were $200, sometimes they were $400, depending on whether it was NQ or ES. But the thing that I want to draw your attention to is that when I find a sensitive spot, and that's what this channel is all about, finding a level where you have the highest likelihood of a bounce. These are the places that I'm taking pinpoint bounces, and I'm wanting to stay in the trade for a very, very short period of time, because the longer you're in a trade, the greater the likelihood is that it can reverse and go right against you. So I like to take those quick bounces, and here we are, 37 seconds on the average trade time, which is ideal for me. And I'm going to show you some of the ideal trades that I had today. So let's get into it. So here you have my main screen, and if you've been following any of my videos, you'll know that I have more than a few indicators on the charts. And if you haven't been following my videos, check the links below in the memo section to be able to go back and watch the videos that show precisely why I follow the things that I follow. And this is my main screen. I do have two other screens, but what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to drill down into some of the individual screens and show you the things that I was looking for to inform the trades that I took. So let's start out by looking at SPX. Now on SPX, because it doesn't run overnight and ES does, SPX opened with a bit of a gap down, and it gapped down to this area right here, which was a spot where the 200 SMA and the 200 EMA were rising to. And I thought to myself, wow, if the 200 EMA and SMA cross, which they looked here as if they would, if they cross and price touches that cross at the exact same time, there's probably a pretty good likelihood of a bounce right there. And as you know, I like to get confirmation of my trades on 3 or 4 different charts, whether it's NDX, NQ, ES, SPY, Qs. But in this particular case, I thought, it's going to be early in the trading action, and this is 5 or 6 minutes into the trading action, and it's probably going to be pretty volatile, going up, going down, and as a result, traders are not going to want to just let the market plunge right out of the gate. They're going to probably look for a place to have a battle, and I thought, okay, this is probably a pretty good place to have a battle. Now, let's take a look at what it looked like on ES at the exact same time. So actually, on ES, there was nothing on that candle that gave you any indication that there would be a bounce there. But the support for the trade came on SPY, which was a pivot point line right at that spot. So there was confirmation on SPX and SPY, and that's why I took a chance on that first ES trade. And then back to watching SPX. After that little bounce right there, I didn't want to try to catch another bounce right there. Typically what I'll do is I will catch a bounce on a level, and then if it comes back to that level, the likelihood is that I'm not going to take a second try at a trade on that same level. Usually what I'll do is I'll expect that once it bounces on a certain level, when it comes back to that level, it'll probably blow through it. And that's not always the case. Often there's a second bounce. But in this particular case, I waited for price action to come down to this pivot point on SPX right there. Now, let's take a look at some of the other instruments. Now on NDX, the exact same pivot point was right there as was the case with SPX. So we had a pivot point here on NDX and a pivot point here on SPX. What was next? Again, back to ES, there was really nothing there that indicated that there should be a bounce there. But on the composite, which you've heard me discuss, the market came down and touched this 200 EMA from the 5-minute chart as displayed on this 1-minute chart. And that is a very, very important line to watch on all instruments. That's the 200 EMA or SMA from the 5-minute chart, and I have them displayed on the 1-minute chart by setting the length to 1000. And often, more often than not, you'll get a bounce right there. So even though we had no confirmation actually on ES, so far we've got confirmations on SPX, NDX, and the composite. Let's take a look at SPY. SPY was sort of in the middle of nowhere. There was no significant bounce spot there for SPY on that trade. And on Qs, price was reaching down, and even though this is the day's volume profile POC, it probably was not there at that moment. But as you can see, Qs actually pierced its pivot line of the day right there as well. So based upon the touch on SPX, NDX, and the composite, I took the trade on ES. And now going back to SPX, we're looking at about 42, 45 minutes into the trading day. And this is where SPX is coming down and nearly touching its weekly pivot point. There's a daily pivot point above here, which we took that bounce on earlier, and now it's coming down to this weekly pivot point. And again, as I've mentioned in other videos, I watch SPX very closely because it has 2 to 3 times the amount of volume on a daily basis as ES. You've got the banks, the institutions, and the big hedge funds running their algo programs, their buying programs and selling programs, and they're doing it with huge contract sizes and amounts on SPX and on NDX. So when there is a significant level touch on SPX, I'm looking to SPY and ES to take that entry. So let's take a look at this spot. We've got 12 minutes after 9 Central Time. Let's take a look at some of the other instruments and see if we can find some support there. Now on NDX, NDX is also still dancing around this daily pivot point. So we're not sure if it's just going to blow through it or if it's going to treat it as support. But on ES, this was the perfect spot to also catch the daily pivot. And you can't quite see it, but this candle right here did not quite come down and touch the pivot point, which as a result, that would inform a trade later for when ES actually did come down and touch the pivot point. But back to this trade, let's take a look at NQ, Qs, and SPY and see if we can find support there as well. NQ, no support. The composite, on the other hand, had a perfect 200 SMA on the 5-minute chart bounce. Perfect. And that's a very strong indication for a bounce. And then to SPY, we find that this candle did not quite come down before bouncing on this pivot point. So it was front run by the market, a very healthy bounce up to intraday VWAP and this other pivot point. And that informed us for when the market did come down and actually touch that pivot point, that there was a very high likelihood of a bounce then as well. And here we are back at SPX, and after those bounces that we just discussed, where did the market bounce to? Well, it bounced up to this 200 EMA area and tried to roll, and again did not touch the pivot line, and then ran right up to the 100 EMA, retreated down to the 200, then back up to the 100 EMA, could not get beyond it. That's why the 100 EMAs are also very, very valuable. And then it rolled down and touched this first pivot again, where there was a nice little bounce, and then touched this next pivot, which provided for a very, very nice bounce. Now let's look at those spots on the other charts. And again, here we have on ES that ideal bounce that was taken when price finally did come down and touch the day's pivot point, which was also perfectly supported with this SPY bounce off the pivot point. Now, after that pivot point was touched and it bounced and could not even make it up to the 100 EMA and started to roll hard, I was no longer looking at the pivot point here. I was looking at the white dashed line here, which is the previous day VWAP close, and our next pivot line here, which is a weekly pivot line. So as I recall, I took a long entry on ES when this touched yesterday's VWAP close, and then I think I doubled in and added in on my entry when price came down to this pivot point. So I ended up having 3 total contracts, which bounced up to here, and then I got out. And again, that whole area right there coincided with this other pivot point on ES as well. Then, a little bit later on, Q started working its way down to its daily pivot and bounced, and just below it was the previous day VWAP close. Let's take a look on some of the other instruments, see where the support came from. Looking over at NDX, we see that at that exact moment, there was also a touch on the day's pivot for NDX. And again, directly on NQ, there was a touch on that pivot line. So I believe I took a chance on trading NQ, and I always consider myself to be lucky when I trade NQ, and it works out. So let me take a moment before I continue on and just say, if you've gotten anything out of the video, if there's anything that you like, please give me a like down below and consider subscribing so that you can be notified when I put up new videos. And also, let me know if you'd like me to live stream. I'm thinking about live streaming my daily trades, which would help support my analysis by being accountable to the viewing audience, and might help you as a trader learn how to watch the multiple charts for the various spots that coincide, that converge, where you can find pinpoint entries. So if you would like to see me live stream my daily trades, leave me a message below and we'll see if we can get that off the ground. Now let me go back to the ES chart and just show you a couple of the next trades, and I won't go and find support for them on SPX and NDX and SPY and Qs, but I'll just say that they were very exciting trades to take because they went to confirm this recent discovery of mine of the value of where the previous day's VWAP closes. I'm finding out more and more that this spot where VWAP closes on the previous day, there's almost always some action there. So I did take this trade. There was support on some of the other instruments. But then later on, the market rolled and rolled and rolled. And I was wondering, well, where is this going to stop? Is it just going to continue to roll over on the day? Or is it going to perform a bounce? And where did it perform a bounce was precisely not the previous day's VWAP close, but yesterday's previous day VWAP close. And that was to the penny, the spot that this day's bounce took place. And now we look at the NQ chart, and what did this low of the day align with there? And that is NQ's previous day VWAP close. Let's take a look at this trading action as it's happening right this very moment. I'm curious whether we're going to see a bounce right here. We've already had some interaction with this 200 SMA on the 5-minute chart as displayed on the 1-minute chart of NDX. So it's already gone below it and above it and bounced and below it. But I'm curious if we're going to see a bounce right there. Let's just wait and see if that happens. I'm not sure exactly what Qs and the composite and NQ look like at this moment, but yeah, it looks like it's recognizing that area, and it came down just slightly above it before bouncing. And it has bounced already from 17,911 to about 17,960. So that was a solid bounce. And the thing that you have to remember about pivot points, moving averages, point of control, a lot of these areas are slightly different depending on the platform that you use. And the platform that I'm referring to would be, Thinkorswim, TradeStation, TradingView. A lot of these trading programs that a lot of the professionals and a lot of the non-professionals, just retail traders like you and me, use, these lines will differ sometimes by a few ticks, very, very slightly. And there's also the possibility of front-running a move and not letting price get right down to that area, but wanting to front-run it. So you have to consider all these things. And here, the 200 EMA on the 5-minute chart, that's probably as far as it's going to go before it starts to work its way down again. Unfortunately, I closed my trading platform about 20 minutes ago, so I did not take advantage of this trade. But wow, that was a beautiful trade. Beautiful trade, and we're going to see if it reverses here. No. Let's go over and take a look at Qs and NQ and see what kind of support there was for the trade over there. Oh, here we go. NQ had a mid pivot point right there, and it did not have the 200 EMA SMA just at this level right here. It decided it was going to run all the way up to the 100 SMA and the 100 EMA here. Now, I'm going to guess that the likelihood is it's going to retreat right here, especially in light of the fact that there's an indecision candle right there. And if you're curious about the indecision candles, make sure you take a look at the video I placed below on special candles and price action reading. Let's take a jump over and look at Qs. And here we are, the same thing with Qs. We did not have anything that supported a bounce here other than an indecision candle, which was right here. And again, you'll learn from my video on indecision candles that you look for a candle that is small, can be green, can be red, often red, and it is followed by an explosive candle in the opposite direction. When price bounces at that spot and then comes back down to it, you'll often see a reaction. And so this indecision candle that corresponded with those other levels that I showed you on NDX made for an excellent bounce right here. So here's a small addendum. I'm actually inserting this small piece after I had completed the video. We just finished talking about this bounce that was taken off the 200 SMA from the 5-minute chart on NDX, and we were wondering, oh, was it going to reverse at this 200 EMA? And then we determined from the other chart, Qs and NQ, that it didn't also have a 200 EMA up here. It ran up to this 100 EMA, SMA area on Qs and on NQ. But the interesting thing that I want to bring to your attention is that bounce ended up running and running and running and running. And where did it reverse? Let's take a look at some of the other charts. Well, first of all, on NQ, it literally ran directly to VWAP to the penny and reversed right there. And that happens all the time. Bounces on VWAP or bounces on intraday VWAP happen all the time, and reversals happen there as well. Here's earlier action where price bounced that we discussed earlier, and it went right to this joint area of the pivot point, intraday VWAP, and the 200 SMA. So this particular run went right to VWAP and reversed. But was that the only thing that supported it? Let's take a look elsewhere. Now you look at SPY and you see that VWAP and intraday VWAP were running much lower. And when this same bounce that we discovered on NQ ran up, it did run up to VWAP and reverse, but then bounced on the 200s and kept going. And why did it stop right there? Well, you can say it stopped because that's where NQ hit its own VWAP, but you can also go back and look at the indecision and explosive candle sets from much, much earlier. Now, this is where SPY and ES reversed. Look all the way to the left, and what do you see? You see an area where there are a bunch of very small candles. Small, 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 small. And then you see a big explosive candle to the downside. So just before the explosive candle, you draw a little box and you carry it forward. And you're told exactly why SPY reversed right at that spot instead of running up to the 200 EMA from the 5-minute chart here. And if you go back to that spot, but open your chart up to a tick chart, I'm going to show you something very interesting. So you change the tick chart to today and let's say 333 ticks. And then you go to that spot where you just drew the box and you refine the box. Now, how are you going to refine it? You've got candles going up, down, up, down, up, 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 down, up, down, down, up. And then on this candle right here, you have the beginnings of the explosive move downward. So it's the beginning of this candle right here. So you take this box and you wrap it around the previous candle. It's that previous little candle just before the explosive move in the opposite direction. Now that we've drawn this, let's go back to a 1-minute chart and see how that coincides with that reversal. And there you have it, a pinpoint entry on that box right there. Very low risk, taking a short entry right here. Very low risk because you know your thesis is wrong if it simply goes up and breaks this candle right here. And of course, this is SPY, but the identical thing is taking place on ES. So stopping out from a short on this trade right here is probably $100, maybe. So that's all I have for today. Thank you very much for watching. Again, please give me a like if you enjoyed the video, and subscribe if you want to be notified of new videos coming out. And do let me know if you'd like to have me begin live streaming my trades. Okay, thanks again for watching. Have a great day.